because we think it's so important, not just for our economy, but for our country. But that also manages to seize the potential opportunities that AI brings for not just for jobs and growth, though that is vital, but for all the other huge benefits, the positive ways that AI can be used. And you will know that we have committed in the legislation to bringing forward a report by the 18th of March, which will do a whole range of things, including setting out the way forward. So we are genuinely consulting. We are developing our proposals, so we don't have a list of areas that we can promise to you, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, because we are genuinely consulting to try and find a way forward. I would say that I know the issue of reward is incredibly important for creatives. So too is control of their art, what they produce, controlling that, and also being rewarded for it. One of the things that was crystal clear in the consultation was just how important and fundamental it is for the creative sector to have those two issues at the heart of the way forward.
It's worth, I take your point about the reset and the fact that you're consulting, but it's worth saying that we've had reflected to us from the creative sector great warmth towards what the Australian government has done in setting out that it is not going forward with a text and data mining exception. So if I can encourage you to keep looking at that.
We are looking, I would say, in detail at what other countries are doing.
I was just going to say that, I mean, the short answer, as Liz has said, is that we haven't made a decision yet, because I, for one, have really welcomed this moment where we've looked at the consultation responses. As you said, Chair, very rightly, there was an overwhelming preference for one of those models, and it wasn't the government's original preferred model. I think one of the learning points for this government has been that it was a mistake to start with a preferred model, the opt-out model. What we learnt through that consultation is that there's very different implications for different parts of the creative industries from the different models, and we have to take a far more nuanced approach to this and work with different parts of the creative industries to address their very serious and in some cases existential challenge that is posed by the current system, let alone any changes that we may make. I think we also have learned from looking at the experience of other countries. You've obviously got Australia over here, you've got the EU here, and you've got the United States there, that there is no perfect solution to this, and that no country yet has managed to find an approach that doesn't have detrimental consequences to the two objectives that Liz set out. We believe in the potential of AI to this country. We believe in the power of our creative industries. We think both are going to be absolutely essential to the government's growth mission. And there is no model out there in the world to follow that has got this completely right yet. So we are genuinely working through this in a far richer conversation through the working groups, where instead of having two very antagonistic poles on the landscape, we've brought tech companies together with the creatives, and what we're finding actually is that there is a broad consensus forming in the middle around the proper role of government, around the proper role of industry to reach its own agreements, and around the things that government absolutely needs to do, including this issue about remuneration and fairness that Liz talked about, but also transparency in order to try and solve this. So I appreciate that, as Liz said, that is really very frustrating for the committee that we've come here without the perfect answer. But please do rest assured that we're taking it seriously, and we know there is an urgency around it.
Okay, thanks. Well, it's early January now, and as Liz has touched on, the government is committed to publish that economic impact assessment and full report on AI and copyright in March. Will you take a definitive position on your approach to AI and copyright at that point, do you think? Is it feeling like you will be able to take a definitive position on your approach at that point?
I think one of the things we learnt last time that was coming out with a preferred option not least was that not a terribly popular preferred option, but that was probably the wrong approach. So we haven't decided that completely yet, but that's certainly one of the lessons I've learned.
We're keen to be able to provide clarity around this as soon as possible. From the working groups, that has been the number one thing that has emerged from both tech companies and from creatives, is that they need clarity and certainty, and we want to do that. But as Liz has said previously, if we rush into this and we get it wrong, we could make a mess. So we're not going to rush into it. We are going to take the time to work through with the working groups, but we appreciate that there's an urgency around this and we want to move as quickly as possible.
Yeah. What specific further evidence are you seeking then that you don't already have from the consultation, from the working groups which restarted before Christmas and other engagement? What further evidence is needed?
We're trying to divvy this up so that we don't keep repeating each other, because we want to get through all your questions. But just as a sort of first go at answering that question, the working groups have surfaced a few key. I mean, there's lots of things that have come out of them, but a few key things. One is, and it sort of relates to the issue you were talking about at the start, Chair, around Grok and the recent action that the Secretary of State has taken, is around the insufficient protection for what we sort of refer to as the creator's essence. So things like voice and style. We've heard some really quite stark examples of where, for example, children's characters have been used as part of ChatGPT to enable children to talk to those characters in some very inappropriate ways, including very sexualized conversations. Now, it's not just a question about what that means in terms of safety. It's also a question about personality rights and other issues which you'll be aware of. There's insufficient technical tools at the moment for some of the transparency requirements that we as a government have committed to. And one of the things that we're doing is working with industry, urging them to try and find the solutions to that. The working groups have also surfaced the need for transparent processes underpinned by legislation. I think that has been universally understood, especially around the issue of crawlers and the use of crawlers, which is particularly for publishing, posing a really serious challenge. And then the other thing that I just wanted to put in front of the committee, because I think this is potentially contested, but there is a strong view from the working group that the government ought to be focusing on creating the right conditions and frameworks, so issues like transparency, not intervening overly in licensing deals, which industry is already coming together to reach. And so a demarcation of the roles, essentially, where creatives and tech companies are finding their own solutions to some of those challenges, but there are certain things that they can't do that government ought to do. So that is why we're still doing this process through the working groups, because it has actually surfaced that there are some areas where it needs further work.
And there'll be more meetings of the working groups, adding more people in, getting more information. So we've done one round of those, but I think there will be more in February.
Thank you. I'll come to Baroness Owen now. Charlotte.
Thank you. So the committee is keen to find out more about the progress that's been made to address concerns about the limitations of the existing opt-out system or rights reservation models, and ensure that any proposed solution would be workable for both the rights holders and the AI developers of different sizes. We just heard on the last panel Google say that this option was working effectively. However, the committee has also heard evidence which says that it's a poor fit for complex copyright ownership, and that they only work for right holders who control their own domain, and AI crawlers are simply ignoring robots TXT. So I'd be keen to get your perspective. Is it an Ollie question?
Yeah, so we've had lots of conversations, both in bilateral engagement and through the technical working groups, on opt-out approaches. So it's worth saying the UK doesn't currently have an opt-out approach because we don't have a broad exemption. So opt-outs are relevant where countries have gone down the route of creating an exemption, and then the opt-out plays into that. I think when it comes to the implementation of those, we've heard lots of views actually. So one view that we've heard expressed is that the opt-out system places a regulatory burden on the rights holder because they have to exercise that opt-out. And if you are a smaller operator, you might be a creative operating under your own, that puts some burden on you to sort of go through and make sure that that's expressed properly, and this might be technical. You know, you'd need some kind of interface there to help you do that. I think the other thing we've heard, of course, is that if the opt-out process becomes extremely straightforward, then everyone just withdraws their material from the market. Now, that might be fine in some sense, but if you went down the route of creating an exemption, it would be because you wanted people to access the material for training, and if everyone withdraws, then you've undermined the primary policy goal that you've set out there. I think the other thing that we'd have to bear in mind is when you really focus in on the granularity of how is some of this material encoded on the internet, it becomes hard, you know, the technical challenges in how you kind of figure out, does an opt-out apply to this? So for example, if I wrote and published a blog that was a book review, and in the course of that I was quoting from a novel, there's nothing in my blog which creates metadata that says this is my paragraph, this is the author's paragraph, this is my paragraph coming back through again. So if that author has exercised an opt-out somewhere, how do you know that it attaches to the blog that I might then have published? So I think with the opt-out, we obviously have had lots of views on the idea of an opt-out as a core policy proposition in the response to the consultation. But in going through these technical working groups, we've also waded into lots of the difficulties of implementation. Yeah. And obviously the EU is going down this process as well, and we'll see how that plays out this year.
So just to push the final part of the question, do you think the proposed solution, if they went down an opt-out model, would be workable for rights holders of different sizes? Just to really pin you on an answer on that.
I think as the Secretaries of State have said, the process of figuring out how you practically deliver something would take time to work through.
So just to add to that, I think the straight answer to that question is that there are challenges with the opt-out process that we hadn't anticipated or fully understood before we did the consultation that we don't currently know how to surmount. So it doesn't mean that they're insurmountable, but we don't currently have the answers to those. So at the moment, we don't have a workable opt-out proposal on the table. And particularly, I think if you had the publishing industry here, you would hear this view expressed very, very clearly, is the underlining all of the challenges that Ollie just set out with what opt-out actually means in practice.
And also, neither the large nor the small AI companies, lots of them didn't support it either, for different reasons.
Thank you. So what would you see as the government's role in any rights reservation or opt-out solution, and what do you view as a section that should just be left to industry? So where's the line between what industry does and what you anticipate government will do?
I think the point that Lisa made earlier about what is the role of government in this, what is it only we can do, what is it that can be something that's worked out within or between the different sectors. You know, you are understandably tempting me down a road of the opt-out when, to set out what our role would be. I understand you asking me that, but that would tend to suggest that we are backing that particular option. And, we know why we put the reason that option forward, but we also have heard loud and clear from across the board why that's been rejected. I think one of the things as well I would say that hasn't come up is, certainly one of the reasons why the creative sector haven't liked it is because many would argue their permission should be sought, not have to opt out. Yeah. And from the AI perspective, we had a very strong response from people like the Startup Coalition who said that wouldn't work for small companies. Yeah. So there are a number of different concerns with it. So going through what our role would be in an option that has obviously got problems, you will forgive me for sort of holding fire on that.
And could I just add to that a couple of things that have really helped clarify my thinking, I think our thinking around the working groups. I think it is the role of industry to find technical solutions to some of these challenges, not the role of government. And we have a role in urging industry to do that, which we've been playing. But the fact that it's very difficult to enforce rights that even currently exist, let alone in a new system, I think there is a responsibility on industry to find a solution to that. And so we've been talking to the tech companies about that. And actually some of that work is happening at the moment. There's some really interesting organisations out there, people like Cloudflare and others who are finding their own solutions to this. The second thing that I think is a proper role for industry is around reaching licensing agreements, because I think what we've seen through the agreements and the deals that have already been done is that they are much more attuned to the nuances in their own industries. And like I said before, there are very different impacts on different parts of the creative industries. Where I think there is a very strong role for government is obviously industry itself can't introduce requirements around things like transparency, and that's something that as a government we've committed to, and that can't be done without the intervention of government, so we see that as part of our proper role. Similarly, as Liz was alluding to, you've got a lot of the deals that have been done have worked very well for the bigger players. They don't necessarily work well for the smaller players. Now we're as concerned about them as we are about the bigger players, not least because the creative industries are an ecosystem, and your Ed Sheeran start somewhere, and so we've got to make sure that we're protecting those people as well. I think that is a role for government in stepping in where those deals are not necessarily serving the creative industries as a whole, and making sure that we make this work for tech companies and for creatives.
Can I just go back to you commented about Cloudflare, and we did have a discussion with Google in the last session around various issues in the market. But the witness we had from Cloudflare in December really called out Google and the fact that there's an imbalance in the market caused by Google having the unfair advantage that they have from combining their search with web crawlers. And I mean, obviously, there's a role in there for the CMA, but they have said it will give publishers more control over their content by giving them greater choice of how their content is used by Google. But that only deals with that tech platform, doesn't it? And I think that there's a big question about what the government could do, or could you start to take account of a role in addressing the fact that there's a bargaining power imbalance. So publishers feel that they can't get fair terms. It's a sort of David and Goliath situation, and the Goliath, if the Goliath is Google, then they have this very large advantage.
I mean, it's interesting, again, if you look at what different approaches of other countries, and Ollie will correct me if I'm wrong, but India's approach is, a sort of statutory licensing, where they take, essentially make sure that that's required and then distributed, whether it's bigger or smaller. But the problem with that is that that sort of depends on there being an opt-out approach, and many creatives actually told us that was the thing that they disliked most of all, because they wanted control beforehand. So there's each way that you come at this, there are challenges. Now, obviously, to govern is to choose, and that's what we intend to do. But what's been interesting about these discussions is both, from the technical perspective, and Lisa's absolutely right, that is not for us to do, that is for the companies. But thinking about all the different players in the ecosystem, large and small, on the AI side as well as the creative side, we have to have a system that understands the big players come from small minnows to start with, and we need a system that works for all.
Yeah, and there's also, this conversation about Google we've also had with the publishing industry in particular. When we started this process, there was a particular concern about the role that Google plays because of the search engines. So, opting out means opting out of the search engine, then you've effectively killed off your business before you've started. What's emerged as a stronger concern since then is these AI summaries that you get when you use Google, and the way in which I don't think there's a concern particularly around the AI summaries. There's a concern when the AI summaries become a competitor to the original product, using the original product in order to create another article that that then is used by people instead of the original. And I think that is just an illustration of the challenge in this area, because it is so fast moving that new technologies are being developed all the time that are throwing up new challenges that people debating this 3 or 4 years ago wouldn't even been able to foresee. Now, the challenge that Liz and I have got is that we're trying to foresee where this is going in the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years' time, even as technology is being invented that wasn't even dreamt of a few years ago. And so, you know, we really do welcome this inquiry, and we welcome the work of this committee and the committee and the other committees in the other place that have looked at it, because it is quite a formidable challenge to get this right.
Can I just come in on some of the international comparisons the Secretary of State mentioned? So, as the Secretary of State mentioned with India, when your question was about bargaining and bargaining power, so on the 8th of December, India published a working paper on which they invited comments, and the proposal they included in that was the idea that users would have to pay a predetermined royalty as compensation for rights holders. So you get people paying in there, and then that would enable lawful access. The challenge is that that comes in the Indian paper without an opt-out. Without an opt-out, because if you said there was a compulsory license royalty payment that you had to make, but then people could opt out of it, then you would have to negotiate that with those people to get them back into it, and then you're sort of just back into the same position of negotiating to conduct licensing. But it's worth saying this is also an issue that's come up in Australia. So Australia has announced before Christmas that they wouldn't go down the route of an exemption. They've set out some of the work they want to do, because there's obviously still a lot more detail for them to work through. One of the things they've said they want to look at is whether they also need a paid collective licensing framework under their Copyright Act, or whether to leave it to the voluntary licensing framework that they currently have. So lots of people working through this same set of issues.
Yeah,
thank you for correcting.
It's worth saying that the AI overview issue it has two issues, doesn't it? One, if you strip out the website links, you're not linking to the brand anymore, so you're not going to a particular newspaper or the BBC or whatever. But I was in a situation on a plane recently and looking at AI overviews, which is all I could get access to because there was no internet. And there's the whole thing about, oh, I see. Well, do I trust that answer? So there's a sort of media literacy point there as well. Yeah. If what you get is not the article, from the newspaper or the BBC, but a summary.
Although trusting the answers we read is not just a question for AI, is it? I mean, it's a much broader issue.
No, but it's the action of the AI overview stripping out the links so that you can't even go and check it for yourself. I think. I mean, the work we did on media literacy in the first part of this year, we were very keen to get the message across about the necessity of checking. Yet these developments take that away.
Yeah, and we really recognise that. I mean, one of the pieces of work that my department is looking at is around trust in media as a priority, and whether people can trust what they're seeing and hearing. Mm-hmm. You may have heard me say before, but we are looking as a priority around the blurring of facts and opinion, and looking at issues like serving politicians, presenting news programmes, for example. But I do see this as part of that whole, is that if people can't look at the source and see the source, then we're disempowering people from being able to come to informed views about whether what they're reading is accurate. So there are other challenges as well that we need to address. What I don't want to suggest is that as a government we only see AI as a problem, because the creative industries are increasingly at the forefront of AI and using AI to advance their work. And although there are serious challenges, and we won't shy away from that as a government, and we've heard those loud and clear, there is also a very strong view coming from the creative industries that AI is an absolutely essential component in their future. And similarly, there's a really strong view coming from companies that are at the forefront of the AI revolution, that they need access to great quality human content and data that only comes from creative industries. So actually the two two are very bound together, and the futures are intrinsically intertwined. And although there are these serious challenges, if we get this right, there is a great prize to be won.
There is, yeah. I'll come to Jim Knight now. Jim.
Thank you both for coming. Thank you for restating your commitment to transparency, which is clearly fundamental if we're going to get a regime that works, and in particular if we get a UK licensing market that is vibrant and drives growth that we need in the economy. As the Chair alluded to earlier, we've had this issue with Grok that you've responded to, and the training data that will have been used for Grok, you'd have to assume included quite a lot of harmful data for it to be able to reproduce the harms that it has been reproducing. Does that create a stronger sense of urgency?
I don't think I could feel more urgent. Patience is not in any way one of my virtues, and I hope that my actions over recent days has shown that, but the government as a whole, whether that's in the Ministry of Justice through the Crime and Policing Bill. I mean, we have.
I'm thinking particularly about transparency rather than the Grok issue, which is being dealt with.
Absolutely. We are. Look, just to spell this out again, we made it illegal to share or attempt to share these images for individuals and for platforms, and it's also a priority offence now in the Online Safety Act. That's something that Peter Kyle did, my predecessor. We are criminalising the creation or asking to create these images, and we've said we'll bring forward the enforcement of that this week. And then we are also going to criminalise the sort of underlying model through the nudification app, banning nudification apps in the Crime and Policing Bill. So we are coming at this from this is illegal, and I think it's a really. I think on this we have a very strong package of measures. If there remain gaps, I'm prepared to go further, because I think it is, abhorrent. But it is also a matter of upholding British values and upholding the law. So I believe we should be able to uphold the law of the land in this land. And I've also said previously that if we find gaps, for example, around AI chatbots, some are covered, some aren't, we'll act. I take this issue extremely seriously, because right now, you obviously raise a really important point about, well, where are they getting these images from? Right now, my primary goal is to protect women and children.
And in this committee, we're really proud of the work that Baroness Owen did in raising this and driving this issue over the last year or two.
Can I say, there are, I'm still 3 or 4 months into this role. I know that I stand on the shoulders of many others who have fought for this for many years before.
On transparency, Lisa, you said that there were insufficient technical tools. That's one of the learnings from the workshops. Yep. We heard from Ed Connolly from Cloudflare when I asked him specifically about more granular transparency. He said that he did not believe that this is technically complicated. Mm-hmm. How do you decide who you're listening to when you get the technical advice? Because you've got the vested interests of some big tech companies, and then you might have another big tech company like Cloudflare directly contradicting. How do you make your judgment?
And so that is why we set up the working groups, and why we didn't just have one, because we wanted to cast the net very widely and hear the broadest range of voices. What we have had from those working groups, although there have been some quite serious disagreements and different points of view expressed by people in them, what we found is that doesn't divide neatly into creatives versus tech companies. So as you're alluding to, there's quite a debate going on within tech companies about how you best approach this. But to give you an example of some of the things that have been identified by the participants in those working groups as missing, they wanted... what they were asking for essentially was a triple lock approach. So metadata, watermarking, neural fingerprinting. And there were some very specific gaps that they have identified where there is going to have to be some more work on technical solutions. Now, I think your question really is, why aren't we getting on with the legislating around transparency? And
how close are you to a workable solution is in the end the background question.
And particularly because, to go back to the question about urgency, is because this was urgent when we took office 18 months ago. So there's already a really detrimental effect on both industries as a consequence of not having clarity. So we really do recognise that, as Liz said, and I think, you know, patience, if I might agree, patience is not one of your great virtues. It's not really one of mine either.
So we love patience, yeah.
But what we don't want to do is bring forward legislation without having thought this through. And I think particularly those of you in here, all of you in here who were involved in the discussions around the data bill will appreciate that that's not where actually Parliament or government wants to be. We want to work together to find a solution that we know can hold and legislate or regulate in order to underpin that.
Let me just ask a couple of quick attempts at getting quick principle questions established. One, when you've found a workable transparency solution, do you envisage that being mandatory?
So we've previously given a commitment that we will legislate for that. We are, as Liz said, open-minded to being challenged about the assumptions that we've made, but that is our position. We haven't heard yet a reason not to do that.
Okay, thank you. And then on copyright law, previous suggestions from government that the law is uncertain has, we've heard, created somewhat of a chilling effect on the licensing market. It's been something that, as you've suggested, universally, creatives and the technical sector want certainty. So getting some certainty about licensing would be really helpful. Do you think some witnesses have told us they don't think the licensing laws should be changed at all? They're fine.
We've heard that as well. In the responses.
Do you have a view on that?
Look, there's a whole. If you look at all of these issues, transparency, licensing, if there are any exemptions, if so, for whom, can they be achieved? The truth of all of this is you can't do, I understand why you're rightly tempting us down the line, but it's a package. You know, the thing is a package together. It's got to work together. Not everybody will get everything. That's the nature of this, but we have to do a package. Because picking out one bit without another, without a comprehensive look, that is what we have committed to, that it is not just on those levels. We have to have something that goes across the board here. I think that's extremely important, a way forward that delivers for both sides. We have had a lot of comment that the existing scheme works. The only caveat I would put is a point that Lisa raised earlier, which is extremely important to me too, which is the individuals, the new starters. That's where the next great bit of creativity comes from, and I really want to make sure we have a system that works for, the small players, not just the big guys. That's a real principle for us as a government. Yeah. It's got to work, not just because we're a government that believes in fairness, but we actually believe that's the next new thing. Yeah. We've got to make sure that we protect that.
I can come to Viscount Colwell. Charles.
Hi. I know you're trying to get this as a package, but there was just one specific question that I'd like to ask you. We've heard again and again about the transparency for the AI training or the training data is difficult, and that, as you've explained, is some say it is, some say it isn't, it's too difficult to do it granularly. But what they all say is that they're very worried about the complete disclosure of the training data being a security and a competition risk. Would you look at an idea that all the data training set will be put into a black box held by a regulator, held by Ofcom, and that rights holders would be able to...
I think Ofcom's got enough on its plate right now.
Held by the AI Safety Institute, then held by somebody, and that rights holders would be able to ask whether their specific content is in there. Wouldn't that solve the problem, the concerns the AI companies have about competition and security?
I mean, we're always open to any suggestions. Just for sort of balance's sake in my answers here, you know, we've talked a lot about issues around transparency from the creative sector. You will know already that many, particularly of the larger AI companies, are opposed to what they consider to be onerous burdens on them doing this, and they'll just carry on and do what they're doing in the States that we don't control there.
Yeah, there is a challenge here about making sure that we're working at least in some kind of synergy with what the countries are doing, and also playing a leadership role in that. But I think we'd both be really keen to hear more about it. So if we could pick up that conversation, we'd certainly, you know, as we said at the outset to this is a reset moment. We have brought people together to try to collectively solve this. We think there is a strong role for government here, but we don't think government alone can solve it. So we'd be really keen to follow up that conversation.
So this is just slightly taking it a bit further. You raise the issue we've got of US proprietary AIs being rolled out here. What about some energy to put in a UK, maybe even an open source model? I mean, we've heard about this very cheap, very effective open source model the Allen Institute have organised, called Elmo 3. Apparently, only cost 90 million pounds.
90 billion, did you say?
90 million, sorry. And that it had transparency of the training decisions made, the data being used. It seems like a wonderful model that we could use in this country, and for the government to be able to steer something like that to happen.
Well, what I would say, if I'm allowed to answer on this bit about, I really do want to see great British companies and great British ideas backed. That's not just because I'm a patriot, but because I actually believe in competition, and that I want more brilliant British companies succeeding. I think it is healthy for this country and for the world to have a strong, proud British tech sector based on our values that help lead the world and provide greater competition. I welcome inward investment from countries around the world, and we are achieving that. But I also want to see a much more vibrant. We've got a lot that we're doing to back British companies to start up, grow, expand, and succeed, and ideas around how we do that and the values and principles on which that is based. I think that's a really important debate for us to have, and I want to see more of that in this country.
We are also doing some of this ourselves. So the committee will be aware of the Creative Content Exchange, which is a model that we're about to pilot. And the thinking behind that is threefold. Firstly, that there is currently the notion of fair remuneration is contested because there isn't a marketplace for the content and data that currently exists, and so there's no agreed price. By creating a marketplace for that content and data, we think we can resolve one of those issues. Secondly, there's a genuine challenge around enforcement. At present, most of the disputes around the use of content and data is settled through the courts. That inevitably disadvantages the smaller players. That, as Liz just said, is a point of principle for this government. We think that the Creative Content Exchange can help to deal with that challenge of enforcement, particularly for smaller players. But thirdly, because we think there's a huge opportunity here, when we speak to tech companies who are developing and refining their AI models, the conversation used to be very much about quantum of data. It's now about quality of data. And the UK is a real leader because of the strength of our creative industries in high quality content and data. By opening that up in a fair and legal way to tech companies, we think we will bring huge benefits to them, attract a lot of companies from all over the world to do business with us. But also, if you think about some of the major institutions in this country, whether it's the National Archives or the British Library or the BBC, they're sitting on a goldmine of this content and data that is just simply not being used at the moment. So we think there's enormous potential here, and there's a role for the government to help, not to run this creative content exchange, but to act as a catalyst to bring it into being that could be world leading if we get it right. So this idea of pushing at the boundaries of what is possible and not just learning from the experiences of other countries but actually leading is absolutely at the centre of what we're trying to do.
Segues very nicely into a question from Tom McNally, Lord McNally.
Yes, I was very impressed by the paling of both of you when you saw that Jim Knight was on our panel. It's,
how we react to Jim most of the time.
I want to pick up this thing about the creative content exchange. Before that, a little reminiscence. I've now been in the Lords now 30 years. When I first came in, one of the personalities in the Lords then was Ted Willis, Lord Willis, who was most famous as the inventor of Diction of Dock Green. But I always remember him once saying, talking about a minister, his problem was that he always carried the imprint of the last arse that sat on him. And probably in a parliamentary intervention, but it was very welcome last night, Liz, to hear I watched you making the statement and answering questions. And it was not exactly a breath of fresh air, but it was nice to hear a government statement that showed a genuine outrage and proposed some solutions to the problem. I think the problem that you two face now is that it is polarised between a creative industries of which we're very proud and create lots of stuff and etc. And a desire to do what you've just said about promoting British industry more generally. And I mean, just to put it into one thing, we earlier this afternoon have been talking to one of the big sectors, and of course we can question them hard about their transparency and accountability, but the witness did throw in that they're going to invest £5 billion in the British economy, and that always carries weight. So, you know, are we trying to develop just to bring, there is a question at the end of this, by the way, but one of the earlier witnesses also said that, and I'm not exactly using his words, but we were really, you say you're taking a rain check, etc. That you equivalent, we've almost pulled into a lay-by, and the rest of the world is passing by, and we're talking about a change that is not in years or decades, but months. You know, I think one of you mentioned 2 or 3 years of really fundamental changes. So how do we keep up to speed on the broader thing? And so now we've come to the question. You've just given great hope in this creative content exchange. as a trusted marketplace to support licensing and access to digitalized cultural assets for AI training. Is this because you feel that the present system that we've got just won't deliver that kind of cooperation? And if so, how quickly will this be up and running?
Great. Well, no, thank you. I mean, you know, in a nutshell, we think that we need more creative solutions in this space. We look at the other countries that have taken action and they've run into their own difficulties with the approaches that they've taken. And so we think we need to bring a fresh approach. But I think, Ruth, you could talk in more detail.
So, I mean, I think the content exchange is absolutely not a replacement for existing marketplaces that are popping up. We know that there are quite a few different marketplace ideas around there, and it's also not a replacement for existing deals. I think, as the Secretary of State outlined, there are three sort of problems that we see. I think one is data access, and in particular to really, really high quality data, and the AI firms really need that to be able to grow. And then there's that really important thing about unrealised economic value. So actually there's quite a lot of value in our cultural and creative assets, which is currently untapped. And there's an awful lot of either data which is not available for AI developers at the moment or is not even digitised at the moment. So I think one of the things that we are trying to do through the content exchange is sort of answer that question of, we think there's lots of value in these things, is there? So it's a research undertaking. It's being funded by the UKRI through the R&D Missions Accelerator Programme, and we're sort of testing these theses almost, and the sort of the questions that we're trying to look at is there commercial value in this sort of data that a lot of our public bodies are holding? It's, you know, can you achieve a fair value exchange between those data providers and the market? And then can we then build that to scale? Because one of the other things we're keen to look at is, are there agglomeration benefits that you could get by bringing lots of different types of data together into something like the exchange? And then the final thing is, if we've proved all of this, then, as the Secretary of State was saying earlier, it then potentially provides a mechanism to enable smaller providers, and really importantly individuals, to get access to market through a really trusted provider. So that's what we're trying to look at, but it's a research undertaking, and we'll do a pilot. We're going to launch a pilot later this month that will run for 12 months with a review point in the middle of that, to see whether we think this is an idea that works, because we're trying something new and we're sort of testing and learning. And if that review point works, then we'll sort of look at what its sort of governance structures should be and how we would set it up, and it will then evolve into something. I think, as the Secretary of State said, we're sort of trying to incubate something quite innovative.
That's very, very helpful. Are you sure that you're not treading on toes or duplicating things that aren't already?
I mean, absolutely. What we're looking to do is sort of build on approaches that we've seen, but to answer those quite specific questions. And I think in particular, looking at, is there value in public assets that we can sort of commercialise, which hasn't been commercialised before, which then potentially has spillover benefits to helping bits of the creative industries that haven't also been able to access these sort of deals.
Yeah, and it absolutely goes back to that question at the start around what's the proper role for government in this and what's the proper role for industry. And there are quite a few public institutions that are sitting on what we think is a goldmine of content and data that could be enormously beneficial to AI companies. There isn't a level of trust there at the moment about sharing and opening that up. There also isn't an incentive to do so, because it costs money essentially to digitise and to order that data and content. That, you know, if you're an organisation that hasn't had a huge amount of funding over the last decade and a half, you would be reluctant to make a priority, but you might be incentivised to make a priority if you could see that there was value in it. So we think that there is a proper role for government here, because frankly nobody else is able to do what government can do in this space, acting, as Ruth said, as a catalyst and an incubator, not as the the solution to this, but as the way of helping to bring that solution into being.
One advantage of being in the House of Lords is that you get the benefit of history. 15 years ago, I was on a joint committee, myself and Francis Maud, in the early days of the coalition, which was looking at releasing the NHS database for the benefit of mankind. And we were sunk below the waterline by the Daily Mail telling its readers that we were about to release everybody's health records to the public. But it's still there, and you're right. And it isn't just the NHS. We have some amazing assets there that, if properly managed, and I'm glad my recall of history is being supported by. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Jimmy's anxious to have a last word.
If there's time, but there's a question for Liz, really, which is, look, I think as a committee we all share your passion around driving growth in the economy through AI and allowing that to develop. We, as a committee, published a report on growing AI and create businesses here a year or so ago, and essentially this was an issue, but really big issues around access to compute, access to talent, access to energy, etc., etc. Do you have a sense in your prioritization of things where this sits in terms of being able to maintain, attract and grow an active AI economy?
I really do want to focus on this, and also just say something that I do want to say this, which is AI is becoming the engine of economic power and hard power, the power of nation states. And I want to make sure with my colleagues that Britain wins the right race, that we make sure that our incredible universities, researchers, brilliant startups, creative sector, life sciences, defence, financial services sees this, but that we also understand Britain's role in the world in this. And I think we have to be really realistic about the degree of power, economic and hard power, that AI brings, and that we have a role and a duty and responsibility in this country to seize the benefits, but to shape it to work for all based on our values. And I think that without growth, we don't tackle living standards, and we have no money to back our vital public services. And we will not, there is no path to better growth in this country without AI, science and tech. There isn't. So this was my, I know you are all realists in here, that is the truth of it. And we face huge changes, geopolitical changes here. And Britain's role in this is extremely important. I am very ambitious for this country, for jobs. I believe we can use this to develop jobs and growth in every part of the country. I mean, we are opening AI growth zones in the northeast, in North Wales, in South Wales. There'll be other ones coming. Jobs and growth everywhere. The main things people talk to me about are we need the compute, we need the talent, we need to keep our talent here. And we need, I believe, greater competition in the world, and I believe that we are part of that, and we need to seize these benefits. I want to do this in a way that supports our incredible creative sector. And I think actually if you could combine AI with our world-leading strengths, life sciences, creative sector, defence, financial services, that's the race we win. But we have to do it based on our values. And I want to solve this issue, as does Lisa. But we cannot lose this moment as a country to deliver for our people and to shape this technology, which will shape us, whether we like it or not. And I want it to be for the good of people in every part of the country and based on our values. We are, you know, I feel very strongly that to be in this job, in this country, at this time, is really important, because we can both win and shape this. And that's vital, I think, for the future of our people and the future of the world. So AI copyright is one extremely important part of a whole series of things that we need to do based on our values. And we are determined to deliver.
Thank you. Well, we've reached the end of our time, sadly. I'm sure an awful lot more questions that we could have raised, but it's just to go back to say that it's heartening to see you both today and to hear what you've covered with us. We've spent a number of months on this inquiry, and we still have to write. Our team now has to write up the report, which is always the hard bit. But I think I do take heart, particularly from you're talking still about the reset. That's important, because can't underestimate really that a number of the missteps that happened before have really had a chilling effect on developments. And we've touched on those here, but it's very important, the signals that are going from ministers to the outside world. And so the fact that you're still consulting, but also the fact that we need solutions. I mean, I think people are starting to say, well, really good to be consulting, but we've had a lot of consultation, we've had years and years of it. And I understand why you can't give us exact dates when we're going to see solutions, but we do want them. But I do want to touch on the points we've made about transparency and its enforcement are very important parts of finding a solution, and that's particularly come alive with the knowledge of ex-Grok and the fact that it must have trained on pornography and all kinds of horrors. And so it's not just a question of transparency will open up the remuneration solutions, but it will potentially keep children and women safe. And that licensing, certainly missteps and things that were said in the past did make a difference, and that we do need support to see licensing markets opened up. But thank you very much. I suppose we could just say, kind of go carefully through these things, but try and move to solutions that work for us.
Go carefully but quickly and definitely. Okay.
That's our mantra.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great.
Kind of conversations that are